As we continue with labor supply, there are two important concepts to discuss, or two effects rather. They are the income and the substitution effect. The substitution effect we heard a lot, and this is going to be a different way of looking at it, but the income effect is, in this case, relatively new. So the income effect says it measures the change in the number of hours, which is denoted here by H, the change in the number of hours worked resulting from a change in income, holding your wage constant. So it says how many more hours are you going to want to work, how much additional labor are you going to supply, if you have some increase in your overall income level, given that the wage you make, the amount you make per hour, stays the same. So in general, this is going to be less than zero. Okay? Or it's always going to be less than zero. Because if, for example, every hour you work, you make $10, right, and that doesn't change, but somehow you're given a lump sum of money, your income goes up, okay, then you're not going to work as much because you don't need to. Or you may work the same. But because that wage is staying the same, there's no incentive for you to work any more, because if you're getting paid the same, why are you going to work more? Okay? Or why are you going to work more relative to before? Now the substitution effect looks at what happens when your wage does change. So the substitution effect looks at what happens if wage goes up when you hold your income constant. Right? What is the effect on the number of hours you work? Okay. Now in general, this is going to be greater than zero. The reason why that is because if you are given a raise, okay, let's just go on an extreme. Let's say you go from making $10 an hour to $15 an hour. Okay. Well, if that's the case, then every additional hour of leisure you take, so we talked about the opportunity cost of leisure, so every additional hour, or every hour of leisure that you take, and so it's one less hour that you're working, is now becoming more expensive. So now every hour of leisure you take, you're giving up that $15, whereas before you were only giving up $10. So because it's becoming more expensive to take leisure, you're going to take more labor. Now, observing these effects is pretty rare. Now, with the income effect, you can observe it if you receive some sort of an inheritance, or if you receive a bonus from work, or you win the lottery, or something like that. Because in all those cases, your wage is staying the same, but you are your income is going to go up. The substitution effect is even rarer, and the only time this, because if you think about the substitution effect, it says your income is staying the same, but your wage, how's the change in wage going to do that? Well, the problem with that is that it has to be basically a one-for-one, to where your wage stays the same, but if you work more, your income's going to stay. And so it's really difficult to measure this. Now, the labor supply is the sum of these effects. Right? It's the income effect and the substitution effect. Now, if the income effect, all right, so remember, wages go up. So with the substitution effect, or sorry, with the income effect rather, it says that if your wage goes up, okay, it's going to cause your labor supply to go down. So the income effect is saying that your income's going up. All right, you're making more money, and so because of that, because you're making more money, you're not going to have to work as much. I'm going to show both these effects. Whereas the substitution effect is saying it's becoming more expensive to take leisure, so it's going to cause your labor supply to go up. So if the income effect is greater than the substitution effect, any kind of an increase in wage, right, is going to lead to a decrease in the labor supply. And if the income effect is less, right, that decrease in the labor supply is going to be smaller than the increase. So the net effect is going to be an increase in the labor supply, which will be shown. So when we look at these effects, there tends to be a turning point. All right, there's some ways that you can get to, up to as your wage goes up, you're going to work more. But after that point, the substitution effect is going to become bigger, and so you will work less. And so what happens is initially, as your wage goes up, let's say it goes from $10 an hour to $11 an hour to $12 an hour. Well, now you might be saying, okay, well, that's a pretty big increase. Okay, so from 10 to 11, that's a 10% increase. From 11 to 12, it's an additional 9% increase, and so forth. And as that happens, because your income, overall income, is going to be relatively low, you're going to want to work more hours because of that. As your income goes up, though, let's talk about an extreme case. And let's say that your income goes from $100 an hour to $101 an hour. Well, at this point, all right, if you're making $100 an hour currently, you're probably able to buy all that you need to and all that you want to. And so you may decide, all right, well, I made more, and so instead of working 40 hours a week, I can work 39 hours a week, right, and still make more money. And so because you have the money you need, when that happens, the income effect might become greater, and so you'd work a little less. Now with indifference curves. So when it comes down to people's decisions to work, they have certain decisions to make. Okay, and it's based off of their preferences. Let me take this off here for a second. And okay. So there's a couple things when it comes to preferences. Your preferences is based on your wants, your desires, and it's whatever's going to make you the happiest. And what that comes down to is utility. So your utility is some sort of a measure of satisfaction or happiness. And money can't buy you happiness. It can buy things that can go with happiness. But if you were working 16 hours a day, 7 days a week, now you have a lot of money, what would you do with it? How would you get to enjoy it? Chances are you wouldn't be fully happy or satisfied at that point. Now some people are, but not everyone. Now, on the other hand, leisure. So let's just say you took all leisure in a day. Right? Well, that's great. You wouldn't have to work at all, but then you would have no money. And so what you could do with your leisure time wouldn't be as enjoyable. And so from this, we are going to have some indifference curves or some levels of utility. So the indifference curves that we have here are shown, and what you're going to see from these is that any given point on here, on an indifference curve, okay, you're going to be at the same utility. You're going to be at the same level of happiness. And so we have a few points here, and close this. And at any points on here along this curve, you're equally as happy, which is saying that you're as happy having, let's say, you're working and you have $150 per day, and you are taking 6 hours of leisure a day. So you're just as happy there than you would be had you been making 100 hours a day and taking 8 hours of leisure a day. Okay? So the point is, any point on here, you're equally as happy. Your utility level is the same. Now, there's some characteristics of these indifference curves that are important to note. First, the further you get out from the origin, the happier you are. So, for example, if we look at this point here, A, and this one here, okay, make that a little bit smaller there. Let's go red and okay. So if we are at these 2 points here, so we have point A and this point here. So here we have utility B, which is further out from A. Okay. So just ask yourself this question: would you be happier having 8 hours of leisure a day and $64, which is point A, or 8 hours of leisure a day and $100? Clearly, you'd rather have $100 in 8 hours than $64 in 8 hours. So that's one thing. All right, the further out you get, the higher the utility level. The second thing is that the indifference curves do not intersect with each other. So let's just say that we had another indifference curve here, and there. And let's just say it looks something like this. Actually, it'd still be going down. But anyway, so this is C. Okay. Well, if this was the case, okay, if we're looking at this, it's saying that, you know, how can you be happier? So where are you happier? Are you happier at this point? I'm sorry, where that point here? Let's just say right here, here, and here, or here, here, and here. Well, let's see. Well, if we look at this point here versus here, you can see that. Well, let's just say that this is $6, and let's say this is $110 and $130. Well, clearly here, all right, so we have indifference curve C and indifference curve B. Here you'd rather be at B because you're in both cases you're getting 6 hours of leisure, but in B you're having $130 versus $110. So in this case you would rather be here. You're happier here. Let's go down here. So in this case you would pick B. If you look over here, let's say this is 14 hours of leisure, and we have, let's say, $50, and let's just say this is $110 as well. So would you rather have 14 hours of leisure and $50? Or would you rather have 14 hours leisure and 110? You'd rather have 110. So in this case, you would choose C. So the problem is that if the lines intersect with each other, then it's going to be the case to where you're going to have some cases where one prefer to the other, and vice versa, which won't work out. So the second point is that the indifference curves cannot intersect. The third point with indifference curves is that they're negatively sloped. So remember that a difference curve is a measure of happiness. So if you were to increase your leisure time, okay, so if you were able to take, an extra hour of leisure a day, then you would have to reduce your income to be just as happy. Because clearly, if you increase your leisure without changing your income, you're going to be happier. Well, that's not what a measure of an indifference curve is. The fourth point of indifference curves is that they are convex. So initially, units are valued high, and the more you have of it, it's valued lower. Okay, so this shows that there's a couple cases here. So let's go from point L to point K. So here your income is going from Y4 to Y3. Well, at Y4 on this indifference curve, you're at H4. Okay. And at that point, your leisure hours at H4 are relatively low. You're not taking a lot of it. You're working a lot. When you go from Y4 to Y3, this is showing it going the hours of leisure going to H3. So, all right. Here, in this case, you're willing to give up a relatively lot of money, and we'll talk about relatively in a second, for a small increase in leisure. You're willing to give a lot of money for leisure. Why? Because you're not having that much leisure, and so getting some of it is worth a lot to you. And so if you think about it, if you work 15 hours a day, that 1 hour of leisure you get at the end of the day, when you get home and relax, it feels really, really good. If you got another hour, it would still feel really, really good. Now let's go down here, going from point M to N. In this case, you're still giving up roughly the same amount of income, but now, in order to keep you just as happy, you're not willing to be just as happy. You need to get a large increase in your leisure time. And the reason for that is that, at that point, when you're at H2, you have a relatively large amount of leisure. And so after a while, if you're home on a Saturday doing nothing all day, okay, by the end of the day, you're bored. So those last few hours, they're not worth as much to you. So you're not willing to give up as much money for that. Okay. And the next point when it comes to the indifference curves, kind of going along with this, is that what is relatively scarce is assumed to be more highly valued. What that means is that if you don't have a lot of leisure time, you're going to put a high value on it because you get relatively little of it. So that's what you do get is really good to you. Whereas if you have a little money, that the additional money you get is of high value to you. Now, having said that, last point to note here is that different people have different indifference curves. Now, people who value leisure highly will have a steep curve, which is in A here. And the reason why is because they really value leisure highly. In order to give up any kind of leisure, they need a large increase in their income. Because they value leisure highly, they keep them at the same level of utility. And so if they decrease their leisure, they need to get a lot of money for that to keep them just as happy. Whereas people that place a low value on leisure will have a flatter curve, to where if you don't care that much about leisure, you can give up an hour and not need to make that much more money. And this all goes with the convex idea. And so this is what we look at when we look at indifference curves.